Our report details how advertising through television transforms strangers to your product into acquaintances, and acquaintances into friends, and friends into customers. You could almost say, as a result, that television puts into every living room a selling machine.
Welcome back, everybody. It's time again for Kinescope as we take a look back at the era of live television. And very interesting. We got a big crowd tonight. Maybe one of the reasons because this is one of the classics of live television and recorded television that we're going to be discussing. It lasted for decades. It's a look at the Honeymooners, everybody. And there's a classic shot of Jackie Gleason and the way that he could emote with just his eyes. And one of the episodes that we chose is a great example of that. John Suntress here, Gabe Hardman here, Jeff Parker. Gentlemen, your thoughts on the Honeymooners?
Well, I mean, one of my thoughts is that we have a bigger crowd because this is actually something someone has heard about and is slightly popular. I don't know. That's just me going out on a limb. But Jeff, why don't you tell us about your relationship with Honeymooners?
I thought, well, this is clearly, this is the show that taught us abusive relationships.
Bang Zoom.
We're fine as long as they ended with everybody going, you just scream at me because you love me.
Yeah, as long as there's a big dose of sentiment at the end, everything's fine.
Yeah, it's all about that turnaround right at the end. And it's like, even if you can threaten to beat them, you can threaten to jump out the window, which that wasn't that funny a joke, but boy, they thought that was
they loved the jump out the window joke at the early days of the Honeymooners.
Kept going to that.
But John is already stewing. He's already angry about what we're talking about. So
no, I'm really talking about because after watching the $99,000 question, I went into the Paul Reiser special that showed all the very early ones with Kelton.
Kelton, yes, indeed.
Yeah, playing Alice, and
she's on the right. Yep,
and so I spent a lot of time just kind of processing that and thinking, wow, this is so different because she was like a kind of broader, older style humor. They're just screaming at each other.
Yeah, it was angry against angry. I mean, and that's fine. And it worked. It
worked, but when Audrey Meadows comes in, the tone changes. I mean, hers is a little more disdain, and somehow more worldly.
And she does. I mean, obviously she's pretty, but she, prettier than what is supposedly the case or what they wanted for Alice. But she somehow connects with the camera better, I think. Like I think, but should we a little bit? We should a little bit set up.
Yeah, we got to
what the hell we're talking about here, because I mean so the Honeymooners, Jackie Gleason, Art Carney, like the classic lineup of the Honeymooners is Jackie Gleason, Audrey Meadows as his wife, Alice, the great Art Carney as his best pal, Ed Norton, and Jane Meadows as Trixie, Ed Norton's wife. And
it was Joyce Randolph.
Joyce Randolph. I'm sorry. It initially started as on a variety show on the Dumont network, Cavalcade of Stars, right? That was hosted by Jackie Gleason. He had multiple characters that appeared on that show and multiple sketches, and one of them was the Honeymooners. It was very popular, and so it became a recurring thing. I mean, the earliest versions of it they're available out there on as the lost episodes. They're on. I know they're on Tubi. That's where I watch some of them.
Correct.
And they're very short. They're like 7-minute little sketches. They're a lot about about these two characters fighting with each other, right? It's a deliberately kind of kitchen sinky sort of thing. They live in a kind of rundown Brooklyn apartment. They
two-room cold water apartment in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn.
Without even a telephone.
Without a telephone. It was interesting seeing in these early episodes, like Jeff mentioned, and there's two different Paul Reiser collections of Honeymooners stuff from the very early 50s, the Dumont network. And we looked at 1951. That's the year that it debuted. And there was even a couple stories right away about the Cramdens buying a television set. And it's funny that in the CBS years, they were back with no television, and that's one of the classic episodes as well.
It's not even that fast. The Honeymooners, to get this back to our first show, the Sci-Fi Outer Limits show, the Honeymooners apparently live in a time locked loop that only progresses a week before it resets. So if they buy a TV, it's not there the next episode. Then they buy it again.
Yeah.
Again, not there again, because everything reverts back to whatever the original status. You know, they go to they do a lot of quiz shows.
Yes, quiz shows are huge, right? They went on a quiz show like a couple sketches in, and ended up with a bunch of junky cereal that they couldn't eat. And then one of the later shows that this $99,000 question episode that we reviewed is from the later iteration of this, the one that everybody knows, the classic 39 episodes, which were we all think of as shot on film. But and this is slightly outside the purview of this podcast called Kinescope. It was not on Kinescope, right? It was recorded with this process developed by the Dumont network called Electronicam, which was
Very different.
It was broadcast live, right? It was shot and broadcast live through a video camera, and there was also like a 35 millimeter camera that was stuck to the side of it. But both were shot through the same lens. There was a beam splitter that split the light between the two things. So I imagine those must have been some pretty hot sets, because you had to put even more light on there in order to get to get the image for both cameras.
Well, there you go.
I love the clock right there.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, you're right on the camera. Absolutely, man. And that is an electro camera.
You watch that clock, actors.
Yeah,
exactly. Well, that's the thing, man. And honestly, Gabe, I will slightly disagree, because while the earlier episodes were Kinescope, and that's why we have 251.
I'm just talking about the 39. Yeah,
right. The 39. Yeah, the 39. They developed this camera system. Dumont did it, and Dumont was the third network back in the day compared to CBS and NBC. And CBS and NBC early on were able to grab VHF, 2 through 11 or 2 through 13 channels. And unfortunately, Dumont really had to scrounge to get UHF channels. And it was always a great network from a technological standpoint, much like RCA, backing NBC.
And mean, Dumont started making televisions in the first place, right? They came out of that. Unlike NBC and CBS, they were not a radio station, so they weren't bringing in a bunch of stuff from radio the way those others were.
That's right, and as a consequence, they were more technologically involved. Alfred Dumont, I believe, was the founder.
I think that's right. I don't know.
And there's a guy in Chicago, Bruce Dumont, who was very involved in Chicago television and radio, and actually ran the Museum of Broadcasting here in Chicago. I am trying very hard to get in touch with him to talk about his famous uncle, but to no avail right now. And it's so few people that we can talk to that might have a tie to this period. But it's interesting, so prior to this, yes, there were Kinescopes. When Gleason moved his show to CBS, and specifically by the time of doing the classic 39 from the 55-56 season, he shot the show on this Electrocam with Dumont cameras for CBS.
Right. At a theater that was owned by Dumont.
That's right.
Right? Like a 1,000-seat theater that they were doing it live in front of an audience.
That's absolutely right. And again, we got this shot here of this is what it looked like when they would shoot the Honeymooners live. So it was at the same time, as Gabe said earlier, shot both live with one lens and the 35 millimeter film. They would shoot it live. You would see it live on the East Coast. They would cut together the same shots that the live director called, made it the complete episode and ship it to the West Coast. So that's
right. Well, that was via Kinescope. So like they would shoot the live feed with like a 16 millimeter camera or whatever, the way that you would an archive Kinescope. But that was a reference, so that when they went back to cut together the film that was shot between the cameras, they would be able to cut them the same way as it went out live.
And it's again, I mean, I guess it was a very expensive process. They only did it for the one season. Gleason was
but also videotape came in 1956. So and then was in series used by 58. So like it was kind of in a nebulous area there, transitional area there as well.
Well, and regardless, that's why the classic 39 looks like I Love Lucy, which we all know was shot on film, and it took its cues from classic film and everything. But much like I Love Lucy, it was a 3-camera system that they were calling shots live. Really, you watch the classic 39, there are gaffes. There are moments where the audience screams out things. I remember the episode where they're trying to recapture their youth and they go to the skating rink, and Gleason is like, having trouble like balancing himself on the skates. And you literally hear this woman go, "Steady now." And it's, clearly it's an audience member.
Right.
It was a really, and also, we mentioned the other characters that appeared. I set up that we would watch the Christmas special from 1951 because they essentially did the whole Cavalcade of Stars show as a Honeymooners 4-hour episode. And there were cameos by Gleason's other characters. Reggie Van Gleason, that guy who would spend money like water, and Joe the bartender, and the poor soul, his chaplain pantomime character. And it was they all came up to the Cranbrook's place for this Christmas party, and even to the point of there was a juggler at one point. There's a band and the usual June Taylor dancers in the middle of the cold, the living room that we always see in every classic Honeymooners episode. It's it was interesting, and again, a good example of trying to do live TV. And I thought it was a good combination of what we got on the variety show as well as the Honeymooners sketch.
Yeah. Just one more thing about the electronicam thing. It was what the 39, the classic 39 was was shot on. So that like those cameras are so bulky that that basically you could only shoot like a 3-camera sitcom on it. All these other things we're talking about, like the comedian and the live dramas that are so ambitious with the way that they use the camera, you just literally couldn't do that stuff with these because they're too heavy and you just can't really move them. It works for comedy. Comedy plays in wide shots and medium wides, right? So that's and so those static shots are basically what is the only that's the only way that system would work.
It's fun to explore too. Again, in these early years, we mentioned Pert Kelton. Sadly, she was blacklisted, and that's why she didn't make the jump to CBS. And it's too bad because I do think had the show continued with her, as much as I love Audrey Meadows, I do think it would have been equally successful. I mean, my God, we watched that first 6-minute sketch, and I mean, there are screams right away from what they were doing and as raw as they were playing it and everything. And I do think even by the Christmas episode, which was only months after the sketch had debuted, things were settling down and it was getting more domestic and as friendly as it could be.
Well, Pert Kelton's one of those, she's a vaudeville type person who says stuff like noise,
Absolutely. Well, yeah, and she's literally from vaudeville. Her parents were vaudevillians. She was raised in that world. They, they moved out to Hollywood in the late 20s, and and then she was in multiple pre-code movies, and she had a real career before this, coming back to New York and having a sort of Broadway career as well as this television stuff. But she showed up in red channels. The notorious and unreliable way to out communists that would then the networks and everybody would look to.
Who squealed on Pert?
What's that?
Yeah.
Who squealed on Pert, by the way?
Yeah, I have no idea.
I don't know either, and I have, and like I this is her getting blacklisted and all that stuff is one of the most interesting things about this to me, and I found like frustratingly little information about it.
Yeah, they said that she had a heart condition, and that's why.
Yeah, that was their cover story.
That was the cover story.
And actually, I was a big Honeymooners fan when I was like 12, right? And so I don't know, somebody, but so like I remember like buying, I was into TV and stuff, and I would buy books about this stuff and everything. And she had a heart condition thing was the story that I remember, right?
Yes.
So still in the 80s or whatever those books were published, that's still the story that was being, told in some ways.
And then the search went on for a new Alice, and I forget.
And then Pert comes back as her mom,
right, in the 60s.
In the 60s, yeah.
In the video in the color CBS episodes of the 60s with Sheila McRae as Alice and Jane Keene as Trixie. Yeah, Pert Kelton came back as Alice's mother. But the search for the new CBS Alice, I don't know who suggested Audrey Meadows. She had a comedy background. She was with Bob and Ray.
Right.
And doing live television.
That's royalty.
Yeah. Absolutely, man. No, two of the funniest men ever, both on TV and radio.
Wait, do the Bob and Ray live TV episodes exist? Do we know this? Because I don't. I don't.
I've seen what looks like live stuff, and I'm happy we could definitely explore Bob and Ray. I mean, we've said in our meetings that we would like to balance things out with not only the great dramas and stuff, but really to lighten things up with some great examples of live comedy. I mean,
they're primarily radio, but I didn't really know if that was something that survived or not. But,
I think there is at least one or two, and they're like only they were 15-minute television shows.
Yeah. Oh,
because
okay.
This is the era of just like 15 minutes, but where
things hadn't been standardized in that way, and there were there were still different kind of variations on lengths of shows. Yeah,
and I show this glam shot of Audrey Meadows because when Gleason was told about her, he's like, she's too pretty. Alice isn't pretty. She's a working woman or a blue collar woman and stuff. Yeah. And so
the way she told it, she went and met him in person, and that he that like. He kind of dismissed her and then turned to the people and like, there's no way. She's like this, she's way too pretty. She's way too, glamorous to be, this downtrodden Brooklyn, wife. Yeah.
Yeah. And so she arranged for a photographer to come early, according to her, and take photographs of her in the morning, no makeup and everything. And Gleason saw those and said, okay, that's Alice. That's awesome. And truly, not only a great straight woman for Gleason and Carney and everybody, but also capable of backing off wisecracks as great as Pert Kelton would. And
Pert is really good. It's just that the reason to me Meadows works better is because when you've got an Alice who's just matching Ralph with the intensity and everything, it's like two instruments blasting the same note at each other. Like there's no contrast.
Absolutely. And it's also, it makes him, he's such a schmo in a lot of ways. Like it makes him less sympathetic, right? You, unfortunately, you kind of need someone to justify putting up with this idiot, right? Like, because he goes off on, selfish sort of get rich sort of tangents. He does things, he makes a lot of dubious judgments over the course of every episode. And so you need to like you gotta not just like the way this started was so much the Bickersons, I guess, was sort of what it was based on the radio show where and I think that that you kind of have to, they always lay it on thick with the sentiment at some point in the show, right? And that's supposed to bring you back and whatever, and which is fine. But I do think that you need to feel like Ralph Cramden isn't just like a bad guy, in order to survive, watching the show.
From the beginning, even in 1951, and the examples we were watching from that first year, in fact, I watched not only the Christmas special, which has a great kind of sweet ending, sentimental ending to it. But also, I'm sure Jeff saw it too. The early episode where they think about buying a TV. Alice is the one who gets it, and Ralph is all angry and stuff, and the Nortons come over, and a little argument happens. In fact,
it's great because Art Carney hasn't got his Ed voice down yet,
and he's just as angry as Ralph is. Really,
he's angry. He's playing it a little more doofusy. He's really doing the overdoing the accent, and
he's not doing the kind of gesticulating and a lot of the stuff that would, Anne didn't really have the costume down the way that he would later.
All over the place.
Yeah, but
giant hat.
Actually, so Art Carney. I mean, to me, Art Carney is the great thing about this, right? I think that he, it's not. I mean, particularly, in those early episodes, it's not Pert Kelton who's letting it down. It's the fact that there isn't that level of Art Carney and Jackie Gleason interaction, right?
Right.
And so these early ones, like in the very first episode, Art Carney's in it, but he plays a police officer.
That's right.
And he's
flour dumped on his head, and he's good, right?
Yeah.
And then he comes back, and the first appearance of Trixie is actually by Broadway legend Elaine Stritch,
right? Who also played on 30 Rock, Alec Baldwin's mom.
Right.
For a recent like look at Elaine Stritch and everything.
But she was supposed to be a burlesque dancer or something
stripper.
like that. And,
a former stripper.
Right. Yeah. And but she only lasts one episode, and then Joyce Randolph. Jeez,
correct.
I don't know. So
right. Yep. Here's early Joyce. Absolutely.
She comes in, and she's a little bit more acceptable.
Yeah, I mean,
for the times, right? She's the more conventional one instead of playing up them being even more kind of outre than the Cramdens. They actually become a little bit more like they maybe have a little more money. They have a little bit nicer apartment.
Right, and they're willing to buy things on credit as well. Joyce Randolph. It's a shame because of the classic quartet. Obviously Gleason and Carney went on to great things beyond the Honeymooners. Audrey Meadows was a very smart financial person who early on, kind of like Bob Kane, you'll forgive the comic book reference, but had a wise lawyer when she made her contracts. And I believe it was her brother who said she gets a piece of, should they ever rebroadcast this stuff, she gets a piece. And that became incredibly valuable.
Okay, yeah.
And also, because of her financial acumen, she was involved with, was it Bank of America? But she was with like one of the big West Coast banks for like over 20 years, and also worked for Continental Airlines as a financial consultant.
Wow.
So, yeah, alongside her broadcast career, Audrey did quite well. Joyce Randolph was the exception, and it's such a shame. Never saw a dime, never saw any royalties. Gleason obviously owned the show. And sold it back for syndication for millions.
Although in her Academy interview, I think she did say that when they brought out the quote unquote lost episodes, which are these earlier kinescopes that were not available until the 80s, that they kind of renegotiated something where she got a piece of those.
That's good to hear.
Okay,
yeah. I didn't watch her. That's one of the few archive interviews I didn't watch.
Also, I feel I should point out Bob Kane wasn't particularly that savvy. It's just his dad was a lawyer.
Yeah, we went so far beyond it. I was going to take the opportunity to shit on Bob Kane if possible, but
don't worry, I'm not letting that go.
So thanks for not letting it go.
But you're right. No, his dad was a lawyer and got a very tiny percentage of any merchandising that was going to come from Batman, and there was very little.
And a credit, yeah.
And then, of course, in the 60s, when the show exploded, Bob Kane became a millionaire, and then even more so for the '89 movie. But back to the Honeymooners. One great thing, should you ever go to Elaine's in New York and see all the great caricatures of Broadway stars, they have the original Al Hirschfeld drawings of the Classic Four in a special area in this tiny original bar area of Elaine's. above the bar.
Okay.
And it's like, they switch out the caricatures of current Broadway plays and other subsequent things. But if you want to see some original Hirschfelds, and specifically of the Honeymooners, they're there.
Nice.
And that's amazing. And
That is cool.
this was the biggest show, Cavalcade of Stars with Gleason. That was Dumont's biggest show. And then again,
it was the biggest show on the Garbageous network, though.
Yes,
it was like they didn't really have much going on. But
the ratings back then, the only show that was bigger than Gleason's Cavalcade of Stars was I Love Lucy.
Right. Yeah. So but Dumont was a network that constantly struggled, right? They didn't, like you were saying, they mostly had the UHF channels. They didn't, and apparently at the time, even though I'm a little confused on this because supposedly Dumont television, like they made television sets. So I don't get this, but like supposedly at the time most television sets didn't even have the option to watch the UHF band.
Wow.
So that was it. They struggled, over and over again with with just content problems, with sponsorship problems. They didn't have single sponsors the way other shows did back then. They had a more modern version of it, like, with the multi-sponsors. So there wasn't one sponsor who is determining what the content of each show should be, but they struggled with putting all that together. And Gleason left Dumont pretty early, right? In like 52 or something.
Yep.
To go to CBS.
That's right. And then Dumont, relied on sports a lot. They had the first NFL contract. They did boxing as well. And by the mid 50s, like 54, 55, they were gone.
Yeah. Yeah.
They also, and another show that I think we should explore is, of course, Captain Video, the first great science fiction cliffhanger that was made specifically for television. It was a live production and, in fact, parodied on the Honeymooners during the Classic 39 when Ralph and Ed split buying a TV and official space helmet on, Captain Video. It was very funny, great stuff. And
I feel we should credit Newton Minow with getting the FCC to require that TVs have UHF on them. I don't know why.
I had no idea. Wow.
I just read an interview with him. He's like 90 some years old. He's still alive.
Right. I heard that he was still alive. That's right.
Yeah, he was the one who did the Vast Wasteland speech about TV. And of course, he's like, everybody quotes those two lines. They don't bring the fact up. I was just trying to suggest that they do something more productive too.
Right.
Or whatever. Like, he was the one really behind PBS and all kinds of progressive educational programming.
From my hometown.
As a result, he just gets the goddamn SS Minnow named after him on Gilligan's Island.
That's right.
Because Sherwood Schwartz took it personally.
He still lives in Wilmette, Illinois, my hometown, and I know I've seen him as recently as last year being interviewed. And for 90 whatever, the guy's incredibly lucid.
It seemed like
tell me why we're not having Newton Minow on the fucking show then,
because he's stuck on the island with Gilligan. I have no idea. But
Chicago.
I don't know when. Yeah, I don't know any. I unfortunately have not met them.
Get Newton Minow on the horn. This needs to happen.
I'll work on it. That would be great. No, I'd love to do that. And
then let's cover like the Zenith Factory. There must be some people still alive we can talk to.
Much like Dumont, I know that Sid Caesar, his original sketch show before it was called Your Show of Shows was the Admiral Broadway Review, sponsored by Admiral Television. And he would tell this classic story that it only lasted like half a season. And they came to him and said, Mr. Caesar, we have to cancel the show. And he's like, why? And they're like, well, the show's expensive and we're getting so orders orders for new televisions. We either had to put money in the factory or your show. So we really have to put it in the factory because in the long run, it's going to make us more money. And he's like, we were the first show to be canceled because we were too good. And it's kind of true. And it's awesome. And
that's a lot of Sid Caesar's whole life story.
We'll definitely do it. We're definitely going to.
We should probably just talk about $99,000 question because I know everybody watched it.
It's the best.
And it's really
the best
good.
Episode
it is
of the show. It really, I mean, and it's great because, again, of the moment, quiz shows were incredibly popular. It's obviously a parody of the
they just keep doing episodes about quiz shows, so they must have been popular.
Well, and again, it's so great because, Ralph is initially so nervous being on the show.
That's some of the funniest Jackie Gleason bit in the whole show is when he comes out and he has stage fright. It's so good.
Yeah.
Because it's all eyes.
Yes, he bribes the Dust, and he dusts a bribe. And what's your wife's name, Mrs. Cramden?
Yeah.
I mean, and that's a great thing, man. I mean, I truly, and especially within the classic 39. But again, I think there are examples in the first year as well.
Yeah, and the guy going, a bus driver splashed mud all over me. That was you?
That was you? That's
It's
right.
good stuff. It's good stuff.
Yeah, and I mean, again,
but also as good of stuff is the fucking Art Carney and Norton of it all, right? With the where he, they apparently because Art Carney was a good piano player, like they leaned into this and like wrote bits for him to do this stuff, and the way that the way that so much of a part of Ed Norton's character is doing irritating, repetitive stuff, and that that makes Ralph Cramden more and more steam.
Angry.
And so
Victor Borgia.
Yes,
Yeah.
and like, but that level of repetition where he every time he so on the $99,000 question. It starts at the beginning of the show. Ralph picks a topic, which is popular songs, and then they run out of time on that episode. They're having him back a week later, so he has a week to study up. So he study, he absorbs all the. Yeah, goes into his manicotti. Yes. He absorbs all of the potential popular song knowledge, and then works with Norton. And with Norton playing the piano, and every time Norton starts a song, he has to play Swanee River, right? And it's so irritating, right? Like it just is. And like but the endless repetition of it, I think, is like the boldest, best part of the show.
It really caught me off guard too. It's a classic setup and follow through on the final joke or whatever. And I was like, oh yeah, of course they were going to do that.
But also just that kind of, it's his warm up for every other song that he's about to play.
Right.
Yeah. And it has that almost stumbling into the song. And that's why, because he even says, hey, a pitcher warms up before he throws one over the plate. I'm doing the same thing. So it's that brum, bump, 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 bump. And it really is like kind of this, like, all right, I'm just getting the hang of it every time he hits the keys.
But I also think that it's the style of Ed Norton, right? It's the way he does everything. Totally. Like he has, he's able to, like Art Carney's able to infuse his piano playing with the character of Ed Norton.
That's the brilliance of Art Carney, absolutely. And then I truly have these like series of moments where it's like, who wrote Swanee River? And it's like, what? And then it's like, oh, Swanee River. Can we have a few bars of it? Da, 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 da. And the look on Gleason's face. Yeah. It's just so awesome. And then he's so desperate for an answer. And he's like, Ed Norton?
Yeah.
Did he write it? And it is. It still kills me. And that's
it's
why
so pitiful. It's like, that is great. It's a great payoff for setting all that up.
And truly, you think Ralph might be able to, like, if the first time you ever watch it, it's like, God damn, man. They run through the Great American Songbook, and it's much too marvelous for words, and always, and all these like classic Sinatra, Tony Bennett, Great American Songbook stuff from 42nd Street and all the great movies. And he is there, man, composer, the movie it came from, the year it was published. And it's like, God damn, Ralph might actually do it this time. And he makes it clear to Alice, I'm not stopping at one or two and taking my money and leaving. I'm going all the way, man. And we're going to win that $99,000. We're going to live in Park Avenue. Can't wait to see this furniture in a Park Avenue.
That was a great joke.
Yes, that is a great joke.
It was such a good, like, can't get out of his existence sort of thing. Like, imagine what this furniture will look like in a Park Avenue. I was like, that was well done, whoever did that.
And it's such a shame, as I'm sure Gabe probably researched as well, the disdain that Gleason had for his writers, and maybe it forced them to come up with this incredible material. Because again, you go back to the classic 39, there are so many great episodes from that period, so much so that after that season, as great as it was, CBS wanted more, and he's like, no, I'm going back to the variety show. I can't maintain this quality.
I mean, I'm sure that's true, and that's what they say every time. But it also was the case that the show, the half-hour version of the show, that was not part of the variety show, like debuted, like really highly rated, and then tapered off quite a bit. It was like number 19 by the end of the season. So, like, I think that I'm betting, just because, I don't know, maybe business has something to do with show business, that these things were kind of working together. It may have been about the script, but I bet that it's all of the things.
But I also read that CBS wanted more Honeymooners and less
that's probably what Jackie Gleason said.
Okay, but I mean,
I don't know. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just bringing up the ratings part too, because it seems like it's not irrelevant.
No, and you're right. I mean, they split it to two different shows. Stage show was the variety part of the show that still was going on, but it was the half hour.
Yeah, I'm more saying not that CBS didn't want it, but that maybe Gleason didn't want something that felt like it wasn't as successful as it could be, or something. Maybe. I mean, it's not like he wasn't a vain guy, right?
No,
so I don't know. I have no idea. I'm just speculating a little bit.
Gleason had a photographic memory. He hated to rehearse. They had a stand-in that would rehearse with the regular cast. And he pretty much would just come in and do it, and felt that the spontaneity of the moment was going to serve him better than rehearsal.
Although, I mean, and this is you're talking about like the flubbed lines and people, weird things happening. This is the origin story of this, that he refused to rehearse, that he would, I mean, they say he had a photographic memory, but that doesn't mean he's nailing that exact dialogue every time. And so other people will miss their cues a little bit, or they'll have to fill in, or they'll have to vamp a little bit. Yeah, he would had his stomach as a cue that he'd forgotten a line. And I mean, but I don't even necessarily think this is a bad thing. I mean, I think it brings a certain amount of spontaneity to the stuff, so that it doesn't feel so like hermetically sealed. It's alive. Absolutely. It's a live show.
There's a story in one of the Honeymooner trade paperback books about the show that for some reason Gleason missed a cue. Audrey Meadows was already off stage, and the only person that was on stage was Art Carney, and was sitting at the kitchen table, and nobody was coming out for their cues. They said Gleason probably went because he was sweating to get a Kleenex to mop his brow or whatever. And so Carney got up, went to the refrigerator. Luckily, in this set, there was an orange inside the refrigerator, sat back down to the table and started peeling it in his Norton sort of way, and held the moment. And this guy who worked on the show is like, I have no idea how he did it, but he had such calmness and knew that he could handle it. He's like, I'm sure he would have found other bits of business to do, but someone found Gleason and got him back.
He's the king of business. It's like, I'm sure. I wonder if they even threw some stuff at him just to see what he would do, just because he's going to come up with something funny.
And you know what? All of my favorite actors are the ones who are all about business, right? Like, I love Peter Cushing. Peter Cushing is like, he goes out of his way to find pieces of business to do throughout the scene. Like, there's something just so great about that. The other side of this this whole thing with not rehearsing, though, was that when Audrey Meadows, her very first shot at Alice she says it was the worst day of her life, because Gleason she didn't know that they weren't going to rehearse it. He never showed up. They kept pushing it back. Like, she'd come in and, he just went out to a restaurant. He just whatever. And for days in advance. And then on the day, all they did was a run through with the stand-in. They get off, because it was it was still the variety show. So they were, running through all the different acts and doing little rehearsals, or at least little camera stagings. And she got off, she turns to Art Carney and is like, well, when are we doing the real rehearsal? And he's like, that's it. right? So it was an enormously traumatic experience for her to be thrown into that, and also an incredibly inconsiderate one for Gleason
it's crappy because he's not considering the entire rest of the cast.
Yeah, and certainly not her very first shot at doing this, right? And I mean, I think that maybe Carney or somebody said that they admired her just for coming back again the second time, right? Because it was such a rough experience to be thrown into the middle of it like that.
Well, and not giving a fuck about anybody else is kind of hallmark of Gleason's entire career.
Sure,
and the way he treated writers is notorious, and his living space and offices were at the Park Sheraton Hotel in Manhattan, and he wouldn't meet with the writers. They would literally slip scripts under the door for review. And Leonard Stern, one of the great comedy writers for decades, was one of the main guys behind Get Smart after the creation of Mel Brooks and Buck Henry. He has amazing stories about Gleason's lack of respect for his writers. Whatever it was, it forced these guys to get the best out of them. And even that season right after the classic 39, we all might know the videotape color episodes of the 60s where they went on a big European trip, and that has been syndicated and is shown often and stuff. They originally did that story though with the foursome of Meadows and Joyce Randolph as well, and you could see those on the Lost episodes, and they play there. And these were mini musicals, so they would have these musical numbers. So not only were they making these very difficult comedies every week, all of a sudden they were writing original songs about each story every week. So you got to give these guys incredible credit for, I think, coming up with this. Because it was good.
Sure. Although I'll say I have not seen those musical episodes. I'm just admitting I haven't seen them.
All right,
you don't have to it's not a personal vendetta or something.
No, I'm just saying you're making faces, and I'm just telling you they're great.
I'm sure they're great. I am making faces, but I can't imagine that they're great. But I'm taking your word for it.
They're honestly,
although they've got to be better than. Look, I saw little clips of 1978 Honeymooners, which looks absolutely terrifying.
Yeah.
So
well, they kept going back to the well, and there was great nostalgia for, I think, the original episodes. ABC commissioned those ones from the 70s. They're horrible, and even the 60s ones don't hold up. And that's the earliest, I think, example of member berries, when they're getting laughs and applause, even in the 60s, because everybody remembers Bang Zoom and the various catchphrases of the show. But I have on the Lost episodes watched, and they're not as good as the classic 39, but I have watched those European Vacation ones, and also other episodes that happened post classic 39 that were Kinescopes. Again, Showtime originally showed them in the 80s. That was the original venue for the Lost episodes. But there are flashes of brilliance in some of them. And we also have the stock actors that worked with them, even going back to 51. We mentioned Frank Marth on in fact, the James Dean episode of Kinescope that we did, and he was the boyfriend of Betsy Palmer on that James Dean Danger episode.
Yes.
And Frank Marth was the big tall guy. He plays a policeman in the Christmas episode of 51, but he and the little guy, George Petry. George Petry would be things from Another Bus Driver from Ralph's Company to one of my other favorites, where Ralph gets the suitcase of counterfeit money, and the two gangsters who want the money back hold them hostage in the apartment. And Frank Marth is the big muscle, and George Petry is the little guy. George Petry later on, and actually it's funny, Ed mentioned what's the connection with Paul Reiser hosting those Honeymooner shows. Paul Reiser on Mad About You hired George Petry to be this old editor, because Paul was a filmmaker, and he would always work with this old editor, and it was played by George Petry. George Petry also on Wise Guy, the Ken Wall, Donnie Brasco kind of undercover show, where he had infiltrated crime families. And George Petry in that played Don Iupo, one of the Godfather kind of characters. And then had several episodes on there. And in fact, even marries Ken Wall's character's mother in the series and stuff. But great. I mean, both of these guys are stalwart character actors and were tremendous and great in their Honeymooner episodes, playing various roles, but subsequent roles as well in television. So I mean, really top to bottom, great people working on the show.
We should talk about the Christmas episode because it does give a little more context to the Jackie Gleason variety show, the different characters that he would play, and what does everybody think about that? Because I'm a lot more mixed on the Christmas show than I am on on everything else.
If anything, I think it shows the weakness of the other characters that were recurring characters and stuff. I mean, here I'm gonna bring a couple of them up. Like here's the Poor Soul. And I mean, this is Gleason's attempt to do Chaplin essentially.
Yeah, but it's I mean, it's not a silent character. He's
he is a silent character.
He is a silent character. He said he had dialogue in that.
He did not have dialogue. I'm sorry. I will.
He didn't.
With you,
I didn't get to see it. That one.
He did not.
Okay.
No, this was the staple of the Poor Soul was that it was always done. In fact, I mean that's the thing. Literally, during his scene, the Cramptons are having a Christmas party. There's a great excuse to have various characters.
Wait, was he the one who delivered the beer, or was that somebody else?
No, that's this guy. That's Joe the bartender.
No, not Joe the bartender. Joe the bartender didn't deliver the beer. The hapless guy came in with a keg, right, and delivered beer.
No, it wasn't the Poor Soul. It was
it was just another very slightly different version of Jackie Gleason.
Oh yeah, good Lord, yes. I mean, but the Poor Soul, like the dialogue stops. Joe the bartender tells this heartbreaking story that the Poor Soul was at the bar. Reginald Van Gleason, another, that's his rich man character and stuff. He's having a great party, or he's financing a great party at Joe's bar. And Joe comes in and tells the sad story that they were making, the various patrons were making fun of the Poor Soul. They gave him a rhinestone, told him it was a diamond. He very carefully wrapped it up in a little, napkin. And Alice feels terrible. And she's like, I know I bought a tie that Ralph will hate. I'm going to give that to the Poor Soul when he shows up. And so he, the Poor Soul shows up. It's all in pantomime. I mean, they don't speak to him.
Okay.
And it's just music.
I thought he was the same character who delivered the beer earlier. I was not clear on this, but I don't, I gotta say I bristle at the level of sentimentality in all of this. I can't, it's not funny to me. I actually have a hard time with most of these other characters. Like I just don't, I don't think that I think it's a lot because they're not as much about the dynamic with other characters, right? And so much of what makes the kind of core Honeymooner stuff good are the other characters reacting to Gleason and just the dynamics between them, right? And so, it may just have been that they're coming. I haven't seen other examples of this as much, right? So it may be that they're just because they're coming into this weirdly foreign circumstance of pretending to be in the Cramdens' apartment for some reason. Yeah, maybe that's what's hampering it a little bit. But I didn't really get what was great about these other characters.
The wider character. I guess coat rack of Jackie Gleason ultimately is just pretty much everything Johnny Carson draws on later for a skit.
Yeah, absolutely.
He straight up just used every Jackie Gleason character.
I watched a little clip of Gleason on the Tonight Show from the 80s when he was talking about these lost episodes coming out and stuff like that. And Carson was like, "Hey, how come you've never been on the show before?" And I'm thinking maybe it's because you ripped off every one of his characters. I don't know.
Between Gleason and Jonathan Winters,
yes, yeah,
Aunt Blabby, exactly. Maud Frickett from Winters and Aunt Blabby from Carson. No, it is so weird, and maybe because of Johnny's power, back then that nobody called him on it publicly.
Well, again, when you couldn't see the Honeymooners to check him on it. it's one
Or
of those things.
the
Variety
Cavalcade of
show.
Stars version of it, where
Yeah.
a lot of these characters were, that he was, certainly that kind of Reginald Van Gleason. John, you can do the voice.
No, you're a dandy group. Yeah, that.
Carson would do that shit all the time. Yeah.
Oh, well, that was Art Fern. That was the Tea Time movie guy.
Yeah.
We know Gleason hated being ripped off because he thought about suing the Flintstones, Hanna-Barbera, but didn't want to be known.
No. You don't understand. The Flintstones are not based on the Honeymooners. This is just all a big misunderstanding, according to Joe Barbera. I believe.
Joe Barbera.
Barbera's the best, man.
You know why? You can tell why that's not based on the Flintstones are not based on the Honeymooners. It's because
they're cavemen.
They're cavemen, and they have like birds who act like clothespins.
Totally
they have
you got a rotten job.
There are many caveman attributes that prove the Flintstones are not based on the Honeymooners.
Well, and not only the Flintstones, but Yogi Bear clearly is Ed Norton. I mean, down to the tie and the hat.
Yeah, they just kept going for Ed Norton. It's like, well, he doesn't seem to get mad at us using his voice. So
yeah.
What are you going to do? And in fact, the Flintstones had former Honeymooner writers writing for their show.
Interesting.
So,
also, the Flintstones ran a hell of a lot longer than the Honeymooners did. Right?
Well, yes and no, because again,
but there were sketches on the show and everything, but as a dedicated show, it did, right?
Well, of course, but also, it was interesting because a few times post the Classic 39, Gleason would try other formats, and very infamously, and in fact, you can find. He did a game show, only one episode, and it was called You're in the Picture. And I believe Johnny Carson was one of the panelist.
That's right, because they talked about it on that appearance that I watched.
And the whole thing was kind of like you see at amusement parks, where they'll have like a giant caricature drawing with holes for everybody to put their heads through the holes and stuff. That was the premise of the show. The stars would not know what the giant drawing was that they were putting their heads through. And that was the idea of the game show. And
it was called You're in the Picture, right?
Yes.
And so it was so bad that it only ran once. And it was such an embarrassment that the next week, Jackie Gleason came back on and just apologized to the audience for ever putting this on in the first place.
Yep. And both the game show and the apology, you can find them on YouTube. And they are, especially the apology, very, very funny.
I'm going to go watch that immediately.
He did one more week as a talk show following the apology, and then came back with a new version of his variety show, which they called the American Scene Magazine. And he would do occasional Honeymooner sketches, only they wanted them every week. And he's like, no, I'll only do them when Art Carney is available. And there's a real weird both dependence on Carney and also jealousy of Carney during this period, because there was also a period during the variety show when it was still the Jackie Gleason show before the game show, and he was really sick, and they would have substitute hosts. He would not let Carney be a substitute host, or if he did, it was only one episode. He would have these other rotating comedians do it. And there was kind of love him, but as long as he's under my thumb,
right?
Kind of relationship between Gleason and Carney.
There's probably a little bit there though, where Carney was like an actor, right? Like he more than he was a comedian, and it seemed like he was, as a person, a very recessive personality, who is like a Peter Sellers or somebody is finding himself through character rather than being a personality himself.
No question.
Well, Carney's very definitely the team player supporting guy who makes sure everybody looks good.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
That's one of it's the what everybody always says about Phil Hartman and everything. It's like He's not there to steal the scene. He's there to make sure it really works and pulls it off. And
right,
you are so right. And then subsequently, he's the original Felix Unger in the original stage version of The Odd Couple. He had a tough bout of alcoholism, and then in the 70s, just totally cruised with various acting roles. Harry Antano, he wins the Best Actor Oscar award. And I mean, one of my favorite movies, the original Going in Style. Do not watch the horrible reboot with Michael Caine, Morgan Freeman, and Alan Arkin. Watch the original with George Burns, Art Carney, and Lee Strasberg. And man, that is the closest in a different way of the return of Ed Norton, because they're all three retirees living on their pensions and stuff and bored out of their minds with their mundane lives. And George Burns is like, let's knock off a bank. And they just have this whirlwind weekend of robbing the bank, going to Vegas. And like one of the greatest scenes in that movie is Art Carney, just his bits of physical business, not understanding how to shoot craps. And George Burns just feeding him money and numbers. And it's like, just throw, Al, just throw, and keeps winning money. And it's truly one of the great Art Carney scenes caught on film. I can't recommend this movie enough. If you love Ed Norton and Art Carney, you'll absolutely love this. And I mean, my God, like, you know, Hooker's trying to like entice Carney and he has no idea that it's a hooker. And just great scenes. Or they're in the coffee shop after they're flush with cash. And it's like, I'll have a cream cheese and mint jelly sandwich on toast. And he's like, oh, I think I'll have the same. And it's like, it's just so ridiculously awesome of them just being themselves. And and he rubbed up against Burns just as greatly as he did with Gleason. Just great stuff.
And I believe that was directed by Martin Brest, right? Who went on to direct Midnight Run and Beverly Hills Cop. And he was fired off of it. I recently went to see Midnight Run at the Arrow in Los Angeles, and and Martin Brest was there. Paul Thomas Anderson was interviewing him and it was great. Midnight Run is one of my favorite movies, but yeah, he talked a little bit about the Going in Style experience, and not very much, but that it was a movie that he had been fired off of. Yeah.
That sucks. Wow, because it's a tremendous movie, and Gleason, of course, found new fame through the Smokey and the Bandit movies. The first two are great, even the sequel. Third one, not so much. That focus.
It's all about him.
Yes.
Well, and God, the original concept of 3 was
Smokey and the Bandit.
Well, yeah, to catch the bandit, I need to be the bandit. And there are even I don't know if it was a trailer or what, but I know I've seen movie posters, and I believe him totally made up, looking like Burt Reynolds with the hat, with the sunglasses, just ridiculous. And again, 3 is such a bad movie. When Gary Marshall made Nothing in Common, the Tom Hanks film, and wanted to cast Gleason as his dad, Gleason's like, I'm too old. I don't know if I can handle a Hollywood shoot at my age and my health. And apparently Gary Marshall's like, Jackie, please do not let Smokey and the Bandit 3 be your last film. And he's like,
Gary Marshall knew how to manipulate somebody.
Yeah.
The Smokey and the Bandit's great. It's just weird. It's so wild to think of Gleason working with Hal Needham. But it gets magic out of it. And part of it is, Gleason's mostly by himself and his son or whatever in his scenes or whatever. So he's just doing his thing. It's hilarious.
But the most important thing is to just bring up Hal Needham, right? Like we can't let this opportunity go by without acknowledging Hal Needham.
I somehow didn't mention Art Carney playing the Archer on Batman '66, but I'm going to mention Hal Needham. And
well, you just did both. So
and I still, if I go in a diner, I will say, give me a Diablo sandwich and a Dr. Pepper. Because I don't know why that was the funniest bit of that movie to me. There's so many good bits in that movie.
All right, well, I'll have to revisit it because I don't think I've seen any of them since cable when I was 10 years old.
Yeah, Gleason's hilarious in it.
Is in both movies, in the first one and the second one. No, I agree. And I'll even, believe it or not, because it's a horrible movie, he does have a few moments in 3. Very few. But again. Well,
what was that? John, what was that last movie that he did with Tom Hanks where he's kind of essentially playing himself?
Nothing in Common.
That's Nothing in Common, right?
Yeah, that's Nothing in Common.
Yeah.
And
he's an ad agent, and
he's a sales guy for like kids clothes or whatever, and he's working.
He works at an ad agency, I think, doesn't he?
No, he sells dresses to stores. Yeah, that's his thing. And but he's like a classic old school kind of sales guy, schmearing and schmoozing and everything. And his wife, who's played by Eva Marie Saint, leaves him. They are Tom Hanks's parents, and Tom Hanks is the ad guy.
That's what I was talking about.
Excuse me, because Gleason sells kids' clothes. But yes, Tom is an ad agency guy. It's a very funny movie. It's a great early comedy drama from Hanks. Kind of flashes of what we would get in later movies and stuff.
Gleason gets diabetes and his toes fall off, and
God, that's right. Yeah. Oh, all right.
Okay.
On that note,
for you.
What a great performance, and thank God, Gleason. And in fact, on that Tonight Show appearance, they talk about the film and stuff, and it's while he's making it. No, thank God that Gleason did kind of end on a decent film. It's a shame that he was as difficult as he was. Man, he had a rough childhood, and it is a fascinating story to go through his biography. I hope we get back to him because he made a great anthology episode called The Laugh Maker with Carney that I hope we explore in a future episode.
Yeah, we can definitely do that. So I think that we've done this. I think we've wrapped it up.
Yeah.
So next week, since last week John got to choose, this week I'm choosing, and it's Marty. We're going to look at the other kind of pillar of classic live drama, Rod Steiger, and I think Patty Chayefsky wrote it, and it was directed by Delbert Mann, and so like this is another. I think that's right. I'm not sure. This is just another one of like the kind of core live drama things, like really the first that really broke through for everybody. And it'll be interesting to take a look at that, and then the Ernest Borgnine movie, and more broadly talk about Patty Chayefsky, who we haven't really talked about yet, and is one of the giants of live TV.
And also Nancy Marchand, who, it's funny, as we're getting ready for the Sopranos prequel, Nancy, of course, played Tony's mom, and she is the girl that Marty meets at the dance. No, it's a great story. It's a much like Patterns. It's one of those breakthrough, holy shit, this is what TV can do when it's done properly. And about small character stuff, what they figured out what TV could do at the time, which as opposed to the big movie stuff, like spectacle of the 50s, the thing that was competing with television was spectacle in movie theaters. On TV, they were able to focus in on small character stuff that wouldn't play otherwise, but played great on a tiny little television set. So I look forward to talking about that next week. Alligator Farm points out, and this is fine, he's right, as far as Audrey Meadows' beginnings, she and her sister Jane spent their first 6 years, Audrey's first 6 years in China with missionary parents. And that's why, if you ever see Jane, she is the aristocrat of the family, Steve Allen's widow. I mean,
also Alligator Farm is not a him, it is my mom, Linda. So
I beg your pardon, Linda. My apologies. I'm so sorry. I thank you for watching, and I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Absolutely. Don't dig a deeper hole, John. All right, let's get out of here.
Absolutely. No, thanks for watching, everybody. So Marty next week. It's going to be fun. Stay safe, stay happy, stay healthy.
Our report details how advertising through television transforms strangers to your product into acquaintances, and acquaintances into friends, and friends into customers. You could almost say, as a result, that television puts into every living room a selling machine.